Have you ever been told by your parents, your friends, or even a spouse that you are just too sensitive? You're too emotional? Or do you pride yourself on making decisions based on just the facts? Do you refer to yourself as a logician, a stoic? Have you even been chided for being too much in your head, not enough in your heart? Western culture sometimes divides us into being either feelers or thinkers, right-brained or left-brained, binary labels for dichotomous personality types. At least since the times of Greek civilization, we've prized rationality over emotion, relegating the latter to the bottom rung of our psychic life. We've been conditioned to consider hunger, sexual desire, and other emotions as the baser instinctual drives, inferior to willpower and intellect, the markers of higher civilization. In The Dragons of Eden, published in 1977, Carl Sagan laid out a three-part model of the human brain that reinforced this hierarchy of functions. In this model, our brains evolved in layers. The oldest and deepest layer is the reptilian brain, the seat of our basic survival instincts. The second or middle layer is the limbic system, sometimes called the emotional brain. The outermost and most recent part of the brain is the neocortex, thought to be responsible for rational thought. Until recently, there were few challenges to this older model of the human brain. But new imaging techniques and advances in neuroscience have overthrown the old understanding of brain anatomy and even introduced a new field of study designed specifically to address the role of emotions, affective neuroscience. In his new book, 2022, Emotional: How Feelings Shape Our Thinking, author and theoretical physicist Leonard Mlodinow makes a solid case for a more nuanced understanding of brain interconnectivity and the role that emotions play in our lives. He illustrates through anecdote and current research the myth of objectivity. We do not make decisions solely with our logical minds. On the contrary, emotions are always part of our decision-making process, whether we are aware of them or not. So, I got into my car to drive to church on Mother's Day, May 12th. And after I backed out of the driveway, I reached up to turn off my car radio, which goes on automatically, default station MSNBC. I don't generally listen to the news, particularly these days, on my way to church, because I would like to arrive in a more tranquil state of mind. But my attention was caught by what the announcer was saying. She was quoting the current Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, who apparently said, and I wrote it down as soon as I got in the parking lot, so I was correct, quote, "We all know intuitively that illegal immigrants are voting. We can't prove it, but we all know it." Close quotes. When I decided that my topic for this summer, devoted to heartfelt transitions, would be my own changing attitudes toward the relative importance of logic and emotion in decision-making, I hadn't really thought about intuition. I've never considered myself a particularly intuitive person, and if I did think about it, I thought about it the way the speaker used it, that it is feelings divorced from any particular evidence, and dictionary definitions actually support that. But with a little bit of research, I have come to have a more tolerant attitude toward the possibility of intuition. And I would like to circle back to that at the end of this brief talk. But I want to back up and examine logic first, and then move to emotion. And finally, take just a very brief look at where intuition might fall in how we make our decisions. My home environment directed me toward the definite prioritizing of logic. My father was an engineer, a man of science. My mother appeared to support that. And my own main extracurricular activity throughout both high school and college was participation in the debate team. My degrees, both BA and MA, were in rhetoric and public speaking. Although formal debate is a competitive activity, theoretically includes arguments from emotion, along with arguments from evidence and arguments from authority. Emotion was generally reserved for just a few examples of how the policy we were arguing for or against would affect the people living under it. In those days before internet searching, we carried around heavy attaché cases crammed full with magazine articles and notes and things that we had taken to support our arguments, and you always had an affirmative case and a negative, an affirmative case and a negative, so that you had to be prepared to argue vehemently for either side of the proposition. And I do think that a habit of looking sincerely at both sides of a proposition like that or an issue is a pretty valuable skill. However, I also think that I must have been an insufferable adolescent at times at the dinner table when an issue would come up and I had to play devil's advocate and say, but on the other hand. The summer after graduation, I married a young man who had been on the Texas Western College debate team with me, and we headed off to Ann Arbor where he had a scholarship to go to law school. And if I thought about it at all, I believe that I figured that any little disagreements which might arise in this marriage made in heaven, which they all are if you're only 21, could be easily settled by using those skills of logic that we were both so trained in. I think I wrote in, pause for laughter. But you could also just silently roll your eyes. As a fairly new bride, I discovered that my husband actually did prefer to stick strictly to logic, but I couldn't. And if I had a voice that was raising in pitch a little bit, or shiny eyes that indicated a tear might appear, that man was out of the room. My ex-husband. Now, I have only anecdotal evidence and observation to support this, but I would wager that more women than men in disagreements, whether work or personal, may have been accused of being too sensitive, too emotional. The phrase is drama queen, not drama king. And I hope you have not been cautioned not to become hysterical, which comes from the Greek root word for the uterus. Men in our culture do seem to be conditioned to control their emotions more, with the possible exception, unfortunately, for some of them, of anger, which is considered more masculine. And that was perhaps my first lesson in this transition, that logic simply does not exist independently of emotion, which the modern studies in neurology are telling us is absolutely the case. If we are to believe statements out of Stanford Business School and Harvard's Department of Economics, up to 90 or 95% of decision-making, even for financial matters, is actually driven by emotion. That is hard to believe. Besides marriage and beginning a career, another transition for me was motherhood. And anyone who has ever dealt with children in any situation, parent, teacher, or can simply recall your own adolescent years, knows the futility of attempting to persuade a toddler, a teenager, a MAGA voter, using nothing but what we believe are completely logical arguments. Doesn't work. But I want to leave these aspects of life, marriage, parenthood, and politics, which are pretty common for most of the adult population, and turn to a very personal one, which isn't, what I learned from the theater. As I was composing this talk, I realized I had not mentioned religion or spirituality anywhere, which our first couple of speakers in the series really relied upon a lot. So I was pleased to hear Reverend Barbara tell us at Pine Song that God is on the dance floor. And we all know, not intuitively, but from history, that God founded the theater. Religion and theater have been completely intertwined throughout the whole history of this. And I think even today, there are aspects, certainly of the theater, which are embedded in churches and religious presentations. After we left Michigan, where I had been teaching high school English and coached the speech team, my second teaching position was in San Diego, where we had moved, and I thought I'd be doing much the same. So I was startled at my spring interview before starting the fall semester when the principal enthusiastically said, "Oh, this is going to be so great. We haven't had a school play in years. You're going to want to talk to the shop teacher so that his kids can build you a temporary stage in the gymnasium, just not during basketball season." He didn't know the difference in public speaking and drama. And my first, last, and only experience to that time in theater had been my appearance as Princess Sunshine in the first grade presentation, where I had a great costume and no lines. Well, San Diego community is blessed with a number of community theaters. So when I heard an audition that summer for Arsenic and Old Lace, I was there reading and performed a relatively small part in that and loved it. I'm not going to talk too much about the Sweetwater Union High School presentation of Get Smart in the Gymnasium. But my next foray into theater was melodrama, where I played the heroine with a long flowing wig, fake eyelashes this big, for I think about 6 summers. The theater group that I joined did this every summer, all summer, at a beer and barbecue joint to raise money for the rest of the season. We roasted peanuts, and they were out on the table, and the patrons were encouraged to fling those at the villain every time he was on stage. What a hoot. It is so much fun. Everybody should do melodrama. Melodrama and debate couldn't be more different. Debate at least aspires to rely mostly on logic. There's very little logic in melodrama and pretty much emotion. Even the physical posture and gestures kind of illustrate this. As a debater, here I was behind a desk with all the notes laid out there, yellow pad in one hand, and it's and second and third, and it's very rigid. And melodrama, some of you I hope have seen the melodrama we used to have here in Durango at the Diamond Bell. It's just wonderful. Melodrama is all, no, 1,000 times no, I'd rather die than say yes, and then a big fake faint with petticoats flying up in the air. It really kind of frees you up, both physically and emotionally, and that began a 50-year journey for me into amateur theater, where I was able to play characters that were similar to me and a whole lot of characters who were totally different. That does require some empathy and trying to understand why someone would act a certain way that you would never do yourself. I continued to teach public speaking, and I really enjoy it, and I still consider myself to be a pretty logical person. But those 50 years taught me a great deal about the value of emotion. But now to return very briefly to the question of intuition. I was surprised at how much information is out there, quite a lot of studies. I'll summarize in just a few sentences, but I'm really eager to hear what some of you think about intuition, if you can come to the talk back. Intuition may appear to be almost mystical, even divinely inspired. I think some people say God is talking to them when they're relying on intuition. But that isn't actually the case. Authorities say that intuition is actually an insight which rises so quickly without our conscious reasoning, but is based upon pattern matching. That a great number of similar situations, similar people have occurred to you, and you draw the conclusion or the inference that this is going to be the same. But it happens quickly enough that you're not really conscious of the fact that you have gone through these steps. You just go, oh yeah, I trust him. My dog likes him, whatever. And intuition is pretty reliable sometimes. You may have had really good experiences with that. But I'm told that we need to be careful of trusting our intuition in three important conditions. First, if we're under stress and time pressure, where you get pushed to make a hasty decision, which may not really be what you are wanting to do. Second, if we have very little experience in similar situations for this pattern matching, to say that it's going to be okay to walk down that dark alley in South Chicago at midnight if your previous experiences have been strolling around in a rural setting. That's not a smart thing to rely upon. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, if you have a very strong emotional bias toward or against a certain conclusion, then that can and probably will be translated into your believing that intuition is driving this decision. If the thought of an unfaithful spouse would completely destroy your worldview, you're more likely to believe that that little pink stain on the collar was a bit of crayon in your washing machine. And if your entire political career depends upon the acceptance of voter fraud, then hordes of those undocumented immigrants just must be voting. I want to conclude with one visual aid. I'm going to move over here a little bit. And a return to the ancient Greek philosophers. So Maddie's going to put up a picture for us. There we go. This illustration, which apparently appears on many pottery vessels, is called Plato's allegory of the chariot, which was well known by educated Greeks of his time. The complete explanation is lengthy, but in short, the charioteer is us, our souls, which desire to lead a moral life and travel in the path of righteousness, driving the chariot down the road of our lifespan. It is pulled by two forces, in this case, two horses. The white horse is noble and logical. He symbolizes the higher powers of reason. The black horse is those human desires, the emotions, lust, hunger, anger, pride, jealousy, and the other so-called passions. We can't just cut the reins and ignore that black horse. The chariot's just going to go around in circles and arrive nowhere. Our task is to control and balance each horse. Now pulling back on one or encouraging the other. I have found that it has not been an easy task at all in my life to achieve that balance between what I think would be the logical thing to do and what my emotions may be telling me I'm afraid to do or want to do. There have been a lot of conflicting situations, which I imagine is true in yours too. So all we can do is just keep pulling on those reins and hope that we'll be moving in the right direction. Thank you.